welcome to Christian Answers for another episode. We're talking about Bruce Jenner and the Diane Sawyer interview on ABC. And we're talking about a Christian response to all of this. And we do need to give a Christian response because we are only hearing a secular and a very non-Christian, non-biblical perspective on this. We're only hearing more of an emotional and a feeling-based response. It's amazing when you look on the internet, when you look on social media, when you look on YouTube and Facebook and all of the different sources of social media, you're going to find that almost all of the comments are totally supporting Bruce Jenner and his sexual transformation from the male athlete of the year in 1976 Olympics into what he is describing as his transition into womanhood. Now, that is such a bizarre thing to even think about. And I think if he were on television 5 years ago, I think he would have been the laughingstock of the entire country. Now, he is only the laughingstock of the entire non-American world. I think when we look at the Middle East, I think if you're going to poll and find the opinions of the Arabic nations, I think if you were going to listen to most of what the Asian population has to say about this whole subject, I think they're baffled. I would imagine that the Arabic-speaking nations, the Arab nations, many of them are laughing and they are mocking this country, America, and saying, see, that is the corruption that we're afraid of. That is the influence that we're fighting against. If you want to know what these terrorist groups in the Middle East are doing in opposing America, if you want to find reasons why they would not want to follow along in the Western American model for society, all you have to do is look at television and you have to look at 2020's interview with Diane Sawyer and Bruce Jenner and find out this is a reason why some of these extremist groups don't want American influence in their country, in their culture. And it's because they think that all of the United States and all of America is behind this transgenderism, and they don't want that in their society. And who can blame them? Who can really blame them if that is what we are importing and exporting into their country, exporting from our country into their country? And so when we as Americans broadcast this kind of material, we have to expect the world outside of our little borders, we have to expect them to laugh and mock and scratch their heads and maybe even with disdain look upon the United States and saying, we don't want to be that way. If those people are like that, if those men are like Bruce Jenner, if the women in the U.S. culture support that kind of activity, we don't want our women to be like that. And so you have to say, what kind of influence does Bruce Jenner have on this country and the world? Well, he's having a negative influence. He's having a bad influence. And so we need to respond to this, and we need to tell the world, hey, look, this is not what the United States is about. Yes, Bruce Jenner was an Olympic athlete champion 40 years ago, but that was 40 years ago. And he is not the role model for American men. He is not a representative of the United States. He is representing himself, and he is making a big mistake, and he is confused by his own words. He says right at the beginning of the interview, he is confused. He has been confused all his life, and he's still confused about his own sexuality. And so we see that confusion in the interview. I want to remind people and go back to that over and over again. Out of his own words, his own confession, he is confused. And so we shouldn't take too seriously, and we shouldn't actually follow in any way his confusion. If you get right down to the heart of it, of what he's dealing with, he has a division within himself. He has a male body. He was born a male. He has a male body. He developed that male body to a high degree. In fact, he developed it so much that he achieved the pinnacle of athleticism, and that was he won the decathlon. And the decathlon is, generally speaking, the Olympic decathlon contest is, generally speaking, the epitome of the world's greatest athlete. And he is a male, so he would have been the world's greatest male athlete. So he developed his body to the high point of winning the world's greatest male athlete award. He won a gold medal in the Olympics. And so here is a man. He is a man, and now, 40 years later, he's trying to tell the world that inside of that highly developed male body, that he feels like he really essentially is a woman, and he now wants to correct his body to conform with how he thinks and feels inside. And my proposition is he is confused and he is wrong about what he should do about his confusion. There were different options for him to do about his confusion. One option that he did not take, and he is taking a totally opposite option, and one of the options that he should have taken and should be taking right now is seeking to get his mind in a state that is in conformity with his body. In other words, if he does truly feel as if he should have been a woman all along, if he really thinks that he really is a woman all along, and yet his body doesn't reflect it, he should be taking steps to try to get his mind right, to get his thinking right. There are people, for example, who suffer from all kinds of mental disorders. There are people that suffer all kinds of mental confusions. This is why there is a psychologist and a psychiatric industry. There are counselors. There are treatments. There are therapists. There are psychoanalysts. The whole field of psychiatry and psychology and counseling and social work. This is a huge, huge segment of society. This is a huge industry. Why is it so huge? Because there are so many people who are confused, who have thoughts that are twisted and distorted and do not reflect reality. And part of the counselor's task is to try to help the patient bring their thoughts in line with reality. And the reality of Bruce Jenner is that he is a male. He was born a male, his body configured male, and now his assignment is to try to bring his mind in a line with who he is, instead of being outside of who he is or a distortion of who he is. That's his task. And he has chosen to do the very opposite, and that is to mutate his body, mutilate his body to conform with his confused thinking. Well, we're going to go back to another segment of our Christian Answers program in just a minute. Stay with us. Well, welcome again to Christian Answers, and we're continuing with the Bruce Jenner interview. And Bruce Jenner, we learn in the interview, is a likable kind of a guy. Seems to have a good attitude, as far as it seems to be a positive person. He seems to be likable, seems to be nice, seems to be somewhat polite. Of course, we don't know what it's like behind the scenes, although I have never watched the reality show that he was in for years. And I don't know him personally, but according to some of the people in the interview segment, they had different segments of the interview. And they interviewed Donald Trump, And Donald Trump has known Bruce Jenner for many years. He says he's a nice guy. And he feels sorry for him, that he's conflicted inside, and that he wishes him all the well. Well, I think most people do wish Bruce Jenner well. I think most people who are undergoing some kind of a mental or psychological problem or crisis in their life, people naturally want to wish them well, hope that they can resolve the problem, whatever the problem is. And there are people who are in mental institutions today. There are thousands and thousands of people in mental institutions with severe mental problems. There are thousands, perhaps millions and millions of people, even just in our own nation, who are undergoing psychiatric treatment for mental illness of one variety or another. There are also still more millions who are seeking counseling for psychological problems. This is a common thing. This is a common occurrence. Now, Bruce Jenner has a psychological problem. He has a mental problem. And his mental problem is that he feels alienated from himself because he feels that he really should be in a female body, and he feels that he is internally a female. He has the motions of a female, he has the thinking of a female, and he claims he also has the soul of a female. And so his reaction to this at this point in his life is that he's going to go under the knife. He's going to cut off things that pertain to a male, and he's going to have them surgically implant or put in female parts. He's going to try to build up, for example, he either has or he's going to have breast surgery to try to put implants in so that it looks like he has breasts. He had a Adam's apple removal so that he doesn't look like a man there. And so he has taken the alternative to deal with his mental problem, his alienation from himself. He's chosen the course, and he has the money to do this, to alter his body, to sculpt and shape his body into conformity with his mind. And I'm saying that the more logical and reasonable thing to do, certainly the more Christian, biblical thing to do, would be to seek through spiritual counseling to conform his mind to the way God brought him into this world, which is male, instead of trying to change his body. It's actually a form of spiritual rebellion to do what he's doing. We have scripture passages in the Old Testament that are affirmed in the New Testament and among Christians for 2,000 years, that a man should only wear those things that pertain to a man. A woman should only wear those things that pertain to a woman. The principle being there shouldn't be this gender confusion. There should not be confusion in society. When you look at a person, you should be able to tell if they're a man. When you look at a woman, you should be able to tell she's a woman. There should not be this gender-bending sexual confusion that we see today. We're actually seeing the fruit of that confusion reaped in society today because people are not following the biblical commands. Well, Bruce Jenner is a religious person. He claims to be a Christian. He goes to a church. He actually knows the Bible. But it seems like his faith, his, quote, Christian faith, has nothing to do with the way he's actually living, because obviously if he had read the Bible, if he had sought Christian counseling, he would know that he is trying to do something that is an act of rebellion. If God brings you into the world a male, you are a male. You should not seek to alter or scar your body to try to rebel against the way God created you. You need to accept it and then deal with that, with all of the struggles and ramifications that means. And so what he's trying to do is spiritual rebellion. Now, one of the curious things about this interview is he actually says that he feels that this is God's calling and mission for him to try to change the world. But the problem with that thinking is change has to be in the right direction, and he is assuming that by mutilating his body, he is somehow changing the world for the better. He's trying to be a role model for mutation and mutilation of the body. He's trying to be a role model for rebelling against the created state that God brought him into this world. In other words, he's trying to be an ambassador of confusion. He's trying to sow seeds of confusion about sexuality and gender. And that, he feels, is a calling from God. Well, it isn't a calling from the Christian God, and it isn't a calling from the biblical God. So I'm not sure exactly what God that he's referring to, because it isn't anything resembling the Christian God. Because the Christian God has stated very clearly in Genesis, God made male and he made female, and that Jesus himself in Matthew 19 teaches the same thing, that God from the very beginning made a man and he made a woman. And those are the two sexes there are. And they need to accept that if you're born a male, you are a male. If you're born a female, you are a female. You should not rebel against that, but you should conform to that and seek to do the will of God in the gender you are. And the gender and your sex are the same. There is no separation. And when we look at the Bible, that is the consistent Christian teaching. So I don't know where Bruce Jenner is getting his theology, and I don't know where he's getting this understanding that God has sent him to be this ambassador for transgenderism, because it isn't the Christian God, it isn't the biblical God. So maybe he's got another God that he is worshiping. Maybe he's serving and worshiping another God, and I don't even want to guess who that might be, because this is sowing seeds of confusion into the world. When we look at what he is saying, he says here, this is what I quote him. He says, I had this feeling, kind of a revelation, that maybe this is my cause in life. This is why God put me on earth, to deal with this issue. That was a very powerful moment. It certainly gave me a lot of courage. So that's a very disturbing statement, because this revelation definitely is not a part of the Bible. And so it's basically a feeling. And I would submit that it's more of a cultural or basically a milieu revelation, that he hangs out with certain people. He's in a culture there in Hollywood, and the value systems there are confused. And so that confusion has spilled over on him, and now he feels he's an ambassador, and he's got a calling to spread that confusion around. Now, he wouldn't call it confusion, but from a Christian perspective, that is exactly what it is. Well, we're going to be back for the next segment of Christian Answers in just a second. Don't go away. Well, we're back to another segment of Christian Answers, and we're here talking about this interview with Bruce Jenner. And he says things, for example, like he feels God is calling him to be an ambassador for this transgenderism, and he wants people to feel that they can be who they want to be, and that the next time that he sits down with Diane Sawyer, he says in a year from now that he expects that he will have been through his total transformation, and we can only guess what that means. And what that would mean is that he then will sit down with Diane Sawyer in another year from now, in the same spot, same location, and only he will be maybe in a dress, high heels, a makeup, with breasts. In other words, he will have put on the whole uniform of a woman, and he will probably be trying to tell people now, after this transformation's complete, that he feels better than he ever has, and that now he's finally whole and complete. And we just know that that is not true, because if we look at statistics of people who have made this so-called transformation, the transgenderism, the suicide rate for transgenders, even after their completion, is high, way higher than the average suicide rate. So evidently, when people go through all this effort to mutilate their body, to mutate their body, to put breasts where there weren't breasts, to cut male sexual organs off where they were, and do all of this surgery and pump chemicals into their body, the hormone chemicals for a woman to make her voice deeper and for a man to make his voice higher pitched. When they do all that effort and they get to the point where they feel that they should be whole and complete, lo and behold, the suicide rate for people that do that is higher than the suicide rate for the general public. So evidently, doing all of that does not make a person in that situation whole and complete. In fact, it probably, if you look at it in the nitty-gritty details of their life, it probably makes them even more depressed, even more discouraged, because now they realize that they've gone through all this effort and all this trouble, and they still aren't happy, and they still aren't whole, and they still aren't complete. And the reason they aren't is because they have rebelled against God. God has made people. It says in the Bible, Jesus taught in Matthew 19, he says, God the Creator made them from the beginning male, and then he made female. And every single human being on the planet Earth is either male or they're female. They were either born male or they were born female. And if they were born male, then they are male. And their gender is male. And their life then is set to do the will of God as a man. And if they were born female, their gender is female, and they're set then to fulfill the calling of a woman and not a man. And so it makes it very clear and very simple in the Bible. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not going to be times in a person's life when they don't get confused about their sexuality. They maybe if they've been rejected by someone of the opposite sex, they feel hurt. Maybe they feel inside of themselves that they're never going to love someone of the opposite sex again, so they rebel. And in their rejection of the opposite sex, they turn to the same sex, and they form some kind of a homosexual or lesbian relationship. You know, there's all this psychology going along. There's all this confusion out in society. And people experience hurts and pains and difficulties in life. And there's all kinds of mental and stress and anxiety and confusion. And people are also, to make it worse, they're all in a natural state of rebellion against God, because that's what the Bible teaches. We're all sinners, and we've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Everyone, including the most holiest people, the Pope of Rome, Mother Teresa, they're all sinners, just like the worst sinners in the federal prisons. And yet, God offers salvation. He offers redemption. But in order to take advantage of his salvation and his redemption, we have to come to the point in our life where we admit that we are broken, that we are sinners, that we have a natural tendency to rebel against God, and we do rebel against God. We all have pride, we all have self-centeredness, and we have to come to God and repent of all of those sins and ask for forgiveness. And when we do, he responds with mercy, he responds with grace and love, and he welcomes us into his family. And there we find wholeness and completeness. But we will not ever find wholeness and completeness if we rebel against our Creator. And that is what Bruce Jenner is doing, and that is what he is advocating, and that is what these television networks, ABC, that is what the social media, by and large, and the internet chat boards, they're all doing. They're rebelling against God. They're almost all entirely in favor and supporting and affirming of what Bruce Jenner is doing. But what they don't realize is that they are affirming and encouraging rebellion against God and the God of nature. God made nature a certain way. Now, it is a fallen nature. It's twisted nature. It's distorted nature, so we have to deal with that. But we as humans are also fallen and twisted and distorted, so we have to deal with that. So there's a lot of confusion that naturally occurs during the course of a lifetime. But as Christians, we need to go back to the Bible and find out, what does it say? What does God say through it? And then we need to follow it, follow God's word, follow God, and trust that he knows what's best for us. And when we do that, then we are going to find fulfillment and peace in the will of God. And I'm sorry to say that Bruce Jenner is not going to find peace. He is not going to find fulfillment, because he is doing something that violates or goes contrary to the will of God for his life and also other people's life. One of the great tragedies of this kind of interview is that it gives the false impression to people, especially to young people, that this actually is an alternative for people who are confused about their own sexuality. It is not an alternative. It is not a realistic alternative. In fact, it is a terrible, awful alternative. And I do pray that young people do not embrace this kind of thinking and this kind of philosophy, because if they do, it's going to lead to disaster in this culture. I mean, we're already seeing the fruit, that awful fruit of the sexual revolution of the 60s. We're seeing the terrible AIDS epidemic that hit this nation. We're seeing the transmission of sexually transmitted disease. We're seeing the breakdown of the family, the divorce rate rising. We're seeing the terrible sin of abortion, and people who are totally out of control sexually, sexual addiction, all kinds of confusion that the 60s revolution sown into our society. And now we're seeing an even more extreme aspect of that confusion, and that is Bruce Jenner and his project and what he's attempting to do with his life and what he's attempting to do as influencer of American culture. And so it's sad to say and sad to see how our culture is buying into and embracing this false view of sexuality. And I hope that you don't buy into it, and I hope that you go back to the Bible and back to God to find the right way. Well, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you back another time at Christian Answers.